And Gail just joined us.
Oh, okay, very good. I remember that now. So, all right. Let's call the meeting to order. And I'm not seeing everything and everybody, so I know we have a roll call, but
Did you want me to do roll call or did you want to move forward with the agenda, Lisa? Everybody is here.
yeah, I don't think we need to. So let's go forward with the agenda.
Okay.
Is there anybody here with public comments? Anybody from the public? I didn't see anyone. Okay. And so Max had wanted to make a change to the agenda.
Yeah, I've got a proposed change, and that is to delete new business number 1, the CEO performance evaluation process. With Ian just coming on, it just seems like that's not a reason. I mean, we're not at a point where we would be evaluating him, and so my recommendation is that we just postpone this for the indefinite future.
That is fine. I just wanted to have a formal process for it. I just didn't want to ignore it because that was on the agenda before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Madam Chair, if that's the only amendment to the agenda as presented, then I'll move to approve the agenda as amended.
Thank you, Brenda.
Madam Chair, I do have one slight change request. Under Executive Committee and Open Meetings Rule of Law, I had a conversation with Emily Wright from CBJ Law, and I think I'll defer to her for that bullet point.
Okay, that is fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan, for saying that. Madam Chair, Kenny, thank you for saying that. I was going to bring that up to Emily's on here to lead that part of our discussion today.
That is fine with me. So can I have a motion to approve the agenda then with those 2 changes?
Move to approve.
All right. Any seconds?
Well, then I'll second his.
Yeah,
All right,
I think I was seconding Brenda's actually. So
that's fine. It's just we added another change.
Yeah, we had
Thank
one
you.
more change, so okay.
Yeah, thank you. All right, and so minutes are attached. Has everybody had a chance to review?
I'll move to approve the minutes as presented. And I'll have to admit, I was surprised that we hadn't met since May 18th. I thought there'd been a meeting while I was gone in August, but
There had been a meeting and I can't remember the reason why it was canceled, but it was scheduled around the time of David's resignation and something else that happened.
okay.
So,
Well, anyway, I'll move to approve these minutes as presented.
All right, thank you.
Max, are you going to second it?
oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, second. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so then moving on to old business. I just wanted an update. Chad is new, but and I recognize that and I welcome him. Just an update on the physician engagement survey and then the wildfire court transition, which I believe Kim was going to discuss.
Yes, thank you. And I want to apologize to the committee. When I read this, my brain immediately went to the current engagement survey that we are working on. I did not realize that it was the physician engagement survey. So my sincere apologies. I'm hoping if Gail is on the line, she might be able to give us a brief update on that if she's available.
I think she's still in jury duty.
Yeah, my sincere apologies. When I read that, I thought of the current engagement survey that we're doing with staff, which I can give you an update on that, but I unfortunately don't have an update on the physician engagement survey. My apologies.
It's fine. I thought Gail was here. She had sent me a message that,
Oh, is she?
yeah,
Yeah.
it might be that she's,
You can
She was
look
on.
under participants at the bottom.
yeah,
she was
someone
on.
said that she had popped in, but I'm not seeing her
I don't see
anymore.
her. Yeah.
She's,
She's currently in jury duty, so she's probably popping in and popping out.
yeah, her
Okay.
name's on the bottom of the list on my participants.
Okay. Okay, well then let's defer that. Do we need a motion to defer?
I don't think so. I think you can
No.
just
All right, let's just move on then. All right, so the Wildflower Court transition.
Good morning. So if the last meeting was in May, I will just try to give an update as from July to current on the Wildflower Court transition to being owned and operated by Bartlett. So the transition, basically we worked on that throughout the entire month of June and July, and the transition basically went through without any major challenges or snafus. We still have little small pieces of, or shall I put it, areas that we continue to figure out, oh, we should have done this or we need to do that. And some of the examples that I'll give is one of the things that we still are on a different server for our computer programs and everything. So from a Wildflower Court perspective, we're unable to utilize some of the programs that Bartlett has available to us. But that is everything else. We VPN if we need to get into something or work with them. Our email accounts have been transitioned over to Bartlett Regional, and we're able to communicate back and forth in that manner. One of the things that has not been able to be closed out and completed is the employees' 401k or their Vanguard account, and that has been a really challenging ordeal. Ann Thibodeau and Ruth Johnson are still working on that as employees of the previous Wildflower Court board. We did receive communication back this week. Vanguard went silent for a while after we provided them the 2022 basic to close out 2022, and then they began working on the 2023 employees, and that piece is not fully closed out. We did get a timeline on that earlier this week, and the goal is for that account to be closed out before the end of the year so that we don't have to have a separate audit in the future on that. And I'm not real sure, but I think that Ruth or Ann has communicated to a couple of the board members, and you may have a better idea of that than I do at this point in time. One of the other things from the Vanguard account is that did result in the fact that we did need to, or are currently working on, extending the D&O insurance policy for that Wildflower Court Board of Directors. Policies and procedures are another item that I have been working very hard on to get all of them reviewed, make revisions if they're needed, and then take the ones that are required per the regulations before the board for their approval. So the board will be seeing in my CEO report at the next board of director meeting a couple of items that will be coming through for their approval in preparation for our upcoming survey, to make sure that the board has had a chance to see the policies that are required by them for their approval. The Quality Assurance Performance Improvement Plan is one of those. That is the primary policy that the board needs to approve and to be involved in. From a staffing standpoint, Wildflower Court continues to utilize a large number of travelers, which of course is impacting our costs tremendously. However, we are having applicants trickle in. We have made offers to 2 RNs within the past several weeks, and they have both accepted. On a positive note, one of those RNs is local, and we hope to get her started very soon. And then, I'm sorry, go ahead. Did somebody ask a question?
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
I do have one question, Kim, Madam Chair, if it's okay. So Kim, the quality and improvement stuff, is that going to go through our quality committee before it comes to the board, or will it
did
directly? It did. Okay.
It did. That policy did go through the committee just this past week, so it will funnel up through that committee to you. It has been reviewed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You know, is there any other specific information that you would like included in this report? It came kind of late, and so I wasn't overly prepared to give one, and I apologize for that. I will do better with that in the future. But is there anything otherwise that you would like to for me to speak on?
Actually, Kim, I think this is really great. I know it came at the last minute, and I apologize for that as well. But I appreciate the update, and I did attend the quality meeting, and so the performance improvement presentation that you did there was excellent. So thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a question, Madam Chair.
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's been a long time since our last meeting, and I'm just trying to, I was going through the minutes again, but at the last meeting, we took action to have Bartlett personnel rules cover operations at Wildflower. But at this time, since our board is serving as a board for Wildflower Court, what about bylaws? What is that something maybe we'll hear from the attorney? I see under new business, we're looking at our own bylaws, but what is the status of our bylaws in terms of covering for Wildflower Court?
I'm going to defer that to maybe Nathan Overson.
Before Nathan jumps in, our Bartlett board is now the board of Wildflower Court. So it's kind of like we have Bartlett Hospital, and we have Wildflower Court, and we have home health care and hospice, that we're kind of the governing board over all 3 of those things. So that's kind of how we've separated in our board meeting that there's a separate report from the CEO. Instead of combining it into one, it is separated. But Brenda, I think that's a really good point that you made up. We visit our bylaws, or we should be visiting our bylaws every year with this committee. And I believe that it'll probably have to start with 2024 with us seeing Wildflower Court's bylaws and maybe home health care and hospice, and seeing their bylaws and and seeing if there's any kind of changes or what we could do to make it better. And I think we'd probably be working with Kim and her staff.
Yeah, Madam
Yeah.
Chair, can I respond? Oh,
And then
Yes.
Brenda, when you're done, Madam Chair, I'd like to speak. This is Gail.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just that it seems to me, I know our board is serving as a board for these other entities. And as Kenny, as I discussed with you at one time, in another life of mine, when I was at JAMI, and we had some subsidiary corporations we were responsible for as we developed housing, and HUD requires each of its projects to have separate and separate business entities, and the same board. If you're covering two, you have to end one meeting and reconvene as the other board and move forward. And we need to get fairly quickly here some clarification from legal regarding what we need to do about that in terms of holding meetings. And can our one set of bylaws cover all? I think we're going to need separate sets, which could be duplicative in most parts, but have some particulars in them. Anyway, that, since this is the governance committee, that's what needs to be cleaned up. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Gail.
Yes, this was one of the things that was on my agenda to speak to you, that before we had a transition with CEOs, and it's on my list to speak with Ian on, that we do need to clean up our bylaws and to clean up our board agendas, that we have specific agenda items addressing Wildflower Court as we're moving forward in our transition.
Yep. All right. Well, actually, that segues right into the second of the new business items, was a board of directors bylaw review. We do this annually in April, and when I was preparing the agenda, I had observed the exact same thing. And so I realized that my plan then today was to talk about that process and get the process rolling, because April's coming fast.
Lisa, sorry to interrupt, but Nathan has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see a thing. I apologize.
Okay.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple responses. One to Brenda's direct question. Back in March, we passed we had a motion in this meeting to take on the roles and responsibilities of the Wildflower Court. And as a response to that, we did bring forward the revision to the bylaws to allow for multiple licensed entities to be overseen by one board of directors. And if you remember, that moved to the assembly and was passed by resolution. So I believe the ability for the one board to oversee all of the different licensed entities that require a board of directors does now allow for that. Now, to Gail's point, it doesn't call out specific duties for each of these, but it does allow for the governance of such. So I agree that there should be some more discussion about at some point about what that means and how this board is going to operate moving forward. But the bylaws do reflect that change.
Lisa, I've got a question or comment on that.
Sure.
Just to respond, I mean, intuitively, that makes sense to me. It's very common for healthcare organizations around the state of Alaska have both a hospital and a nursing home that are operating under separate licenses, but one entity oversees both. Now, as we're going, to me, it seems like we probably, it would make the most sense, be most efficient if we can head in that direction to have one set of bylaws for this board to operate under. But it does probably make sense as part of that review to just evaluate whether we need to tweak our bylaws to, reference Wildflower Court and separate licensure and all that stuff. So.
Madam Chair, just and to respond, if Yes, and that's all true. And then the final question is, and it might pertain to some federal law like HUD requiring its own, distinct meeting and set of bylaws or other rules. The same board can do it, but can we do it all under the same umbrella meeting? Or do we need to convene separately with our other hat on to address issues there? And we might have the same set of bylaws. Anyway, we need some clarification, and that I would say, instead of us speculating on it right now, that I would request some assistance from legal in sorting this out.
Okay,
Madam Chair, this is
Yes.
Nathan. I can respond to that, at least from the state's perspective. I did ask that question specifically, and their response was, yes, you can have multiple licensed entity single board meetings, and you can switch those hats as you will in that one meeting without closing one meeting and beginning the next. And so
Okay.
business can be done. And I think as evidenced by the quality committee and moving some of Wildflower Court's quality requirements through the quality committee, I think that is the right move to do in order to show that we do have a process for these other entities to move things forward to this board.
Okay. All right. Okay, so help me out, everybody. What?
So I
When I
guess
was
m-
when I
yeah,
was
maybe-
when I was reading the board, I was reading the bylaws. It states that the governance committee appoints 2 board members to do the review. Maybe we're ahead of ourselves on that, but I'm not really sure how to proceed. I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, I would suggest this. I mean, we're getting near the end of the year here, so there'll be new committee assignments in January. And
Okay.
I would suggest, I don't know if this committee would meet again in December. I have a feeling not, since we don't meet necessarily every month, and this is getting into a busy time. But I would suggest, with help of staff, that we pull together a plan for reviewing the bylaws. And I say a plan because we need to make sure that everything that needs to be included in the review, including the addition of new responsibilities for wildflower, home health, and anything else we might be looking at, that we address that and figure out with input from law too, what exactly needs to be changed to cover us and to be consistent with city enabling ordinances. So,
All right, thank you.
and then take it up with the reassignments maybe in January, starting in January.
Okay, that's a good plan. Thank you, Brenda. All right. Okay.
And through the chair, if I may,
Mhm.
there's also, and I maybe missed out, could speak to this, but I do know that there are some board involvement in some of those required meetings for Wildflower Court, and also, or maybe it's just home health and hospice. Missed out. Can you speak to those care meetings, or I forget again what they're called?
Yeah, the quality assurance meetings that we're having, we don't specifically have a board member in those committee meetings that are departmental specific meetings. Our medical directors are always present in those meetings and or zoomed into those meetings.
I believe through the chair that Hal was Mr. Geiger was on one of the I believe at least the hospice committee.
It was an ad hoc committee of the board, yes.
Okay. Okay.
And those meetings still take place monthly, correct?
No.
Madam Chair,
The CWAPI meetings?
Madam,
Yes.
Madam Chair, we haven't met yet. I've asked Dr. Quigley, Peterson for us to have a meeting, but we have not had a meeting yet.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right. So, all right, we'll move on to the next item then, was the compliance training program recommendations. At the last board meeting, we discussed having training 30 minutes before board meetings from 5 to 5:30 p.m. And then also planning basically a 1-hour training session for all board members to complete annually, actually most likely within the next 1 to 2 months. And so one of the questions that Nathan had that we discussed was if we were going to have these meetings before every board meeting, and if the training could be accomplished in those meetings, or if we were also going to do that training in addition to the hourly training, that compliance training, and then how we were going to set the topics, or if we simply wanted to have the 30-minute training option periodically as a I guess a just-in-time need fulfillment. We are having a meeting, a 30-minute training before this next meeting. And so I think that maybe that we should consider that here in governance first, and then make a recommendation to the board about whether, how we want to do this board training. And then, of course, if we're going to have a 30-minute training before each meeting, what are the topics going to be and who's responsible for setting it, and then who's responsible for presenting it. So that's why this item is on the agenda. And then Nathan was going to speak to that, and then we can talk about it in more detail too.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as I see it, there's three subjects here. There's the board onboarding training, which I think we have pretty much nailed that down and are working through with Mr. Wade Bryson currently to get him up to speed. The second is the annual compliance training. And then third would be a potential for a monthly topic that the board brings. And these are different topics that I've seen ranging from IT bringing an update on security. Once in a while, there's a report from quality and something that is going on in the hospital that's worthwhile bringing to the board. But I think from the compliance committee's perspective, we deliberated and decided that this year for the annual compliance training that we would have the self-paced modules, that a couple different documents that they could read, and several short snippets of video presentations that they could watch. I believe they're hosted on YouTube. To be able to kind of do their own self-paced training, and it is about an hour of content. And then perhaps in the December meeting, if there are questions, we could have a few minutes of Q&A for any of those kinds of things. And then after the Q&A, board members could attest to having gone through that training and also have had an opportunity to ask questions regarding the content that they reviewed. So I think that covers the first two. I guess the next question that you're asking, Madam Chair, is on an ongoing basis on these monthly meetings. I believe even the Finance Committee had talked about having some individual trainings at the beginning. So if I understood you incorrectly, please correct me if I'm wrong. But I don't believe that all of these were intended to be compliance topics. I think these were kind of interests of the board to have maybe at each board meeting. And I don't
Okay.
know if it would be worth having kind of an outline at the beginning of the year of what each of these trainings would be, but only one of them would be a compliance training. Unless, of course, like this next meeting, there was a specific request for fair market value training, which will get its own separate time slot.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
yeah, yes, please.
there was a time in the not too far distant past when we tried having trainings, which were always very, very useful, very well presented with each board meeting. But the reality is, committing, say, a half hour, which was mentioned, of every board meeting, that could be, if our board meetings tend to run on average about 2.5 hours, sometimes longer, it could be, 20% of every board meeting. And that's a lot of time commitment with everything else, and especially adding responsibility for 2 new entities to our board meetings. So I think we need to rethink that. And I like the idea that Nathan brought up, develop a plan again at the beginning of the year about areas of training needs. And to some extent, if that's met with trainings in individual committees, which all board members are welcome to attend if they can, like Finance Committee, then that could be taken into account. But I think it puts a lot of responsibility on somebody, and ends up being, to a large extent, on staff as well, to pull together the trainings for each meeting. So I think periodic trainings on specific topics as needed is more advisable.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brenda. That's the reason why I brought this up, because if we decide that we're going to, allow for a 30-minute training period before each board member, then somebody has to organize the training. Somebody has to set the agenda for that training and then be responsible for it. And I don't like having vague plans for things like that, because then what will happen is we've got this 30 minutes allotted, and then of course nothing happens during it because there's nobody in particular that's responsible for it. So I think that is perfectly fine, that we just use it. We know that somebody can arrange a training if they want to, and then we can put it on the agenda without formally planning that we're going to do this with every board meeting. Sorry for the slip.
Hey, Lisa.
Yes.
I just want to comment. I've got I guess a question along the training side too. First of all, I agree with Brenda. I think focusing on current issues, things that we need to cover, is important. I guess I've got a question around this, and maybe for Nathan, and that is that, I don't remember the board being presented or reviewing a compliance risk assessment for the hospital as a whole, and also what the internal audit work plan is, and what the results of those audits are. And I would like to receive that. I know there was a redraft back at the recent compliance meeting, but I do think that's important, both for the full board, through compliance, that we understand that there is a risk assessment of, what are the areas that the hospital potentially could be non-compliant in, and then an audit process to address those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I might respond through the chair, agreed. And yes, those are items that we're working through on the compliance side. We have developed Hal and I and some of the committee members of the compliance, I guess in our last compliance committee meeting, we approved the draft form. It's a 26-page compliance program review of what we are currently doing. And yes, so the risk assessment is in there. The the annual work plan is in there, and all of those should roll up from the risk assessment. Now that that has been approved, I'm prepared to send out the risk assessment questionnaires, specific questions to specific areas of the hospital, and the directors to answer those. Those will be culminated and reviewed by the hospital compliance committee, and then prioritized. And this will become the risk assessment that will inform the work plan. So those are being developed to be brought forward to the board as a whole as well through the compliance committee.
Lisa, if I could just follow up. Nathan, I appreciate that. Can we get the last one? I mean, the hospital surely has had a compliance plan in place and a risk assessment for some period of time. So, I mean, I know, back in the day, John Ray did this work, and so can we just maybe as a starting point in terms of where the hospital is, get the most recent risk assessment that was done in the internal audit plan and the results as you've been doing them previously to the redo that you're working on?
Yes, I could bring those forward to the next compliance committee.
Great, thank you.
Those have been brought forward in the past, but yes, I could bring those again.
Madam Chairman, this is Ian Worden. Have a question.
Mhm.
Would it be useful to the board for management to develop a list of courses that we believe to be useful, including compliance, and develop a matrix where we could say, this is the type of course that if you needed it, we have, and we can bring to the finance committee, or this is a type of information that you need, and when we have time, we can do it. But we could put together a pretty comprehensive list of things that the board over time could get educated on, and what committees that we believe they could go to. And then your committee could wrestle with that and decide, if these are relevant, or are our committee assignments something that would be useful to it. But we could work with legal and finance and compliance and our operations to develop, a list. And then every 6 months, we take a look at that list and update it for any new developments.
That's a great suggestion.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful.
Yes, please, let's do that.
All right. Thank you. I'll do that, and I'll sign that out to somebody sometime here in the near future.
And Madam Chair,
Yes.
the other thing that might be helpful with that, with working with Ian, is when we have a list of those critical topics of knowledge for board members, is maybe a self-assessment of knowledge on those critical topics. And then board members can assess their knowledge levels of those topics. And then I know we have the knowledge base of the Governance Institute and other self-study areas. And then each board member can really gauge where they are on their knowledge level. So that will help us gauge where we should be putting these topics in our board calendar. So if we see a gap of knowledge on maybe a particular finance level, or, we might move that up in our calendar of education earlier in the year.
Yes, I think that's a wonderful idea. And that's important too, because coming up in the spring, early summer, the board does their own evaluation of themselves and the board itself. So yes, that would all be wonderful to help board members. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll get on that shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so does anybody have any further comments or statements with this topic?
No.
All right. So let's move on. The final for new business is a discussion about the executive committee as well as the open meetings rule of law. This was brought forth as a concern as basically when executive committee or groups of more than 3 meet, it triggers the open meetings rule, which then says that it's a meeting. And Emily is going to speak about that. And if she is ready, I'm ready for her to jump in.
Sure, thank you. So basically over the summer, and part of, due to some of the transitions and some of the meetings, it came to everyone's attention that the executive committee was being tasked with, maybe looking into the CEO process or some other things, and they were meeting with the authority of the board. But what we realized, Sherry and I, and this was a mistake on our part not to realize that you all had a bylaw with the executive committee actually defined, is that you've got a group of 3 with 1 ad hoc member, so 4. But the Open Meetings Act is triggered when a majority of the membership is meeting. And so the balance, the reason we wanted to bring it to you is we can see historically that the executive committee has been a committee that's meeting in public. They're doing this work. In 2021, that kind of stops. And for those of you on the board who have been there longer, you may know why. I don't. But and now the role of that executive committee has changed a little bit due to your needs. And so there's a whole bunch of options. We can keep the executive committee as is. We can create a team when issues come up that are not actually committee. We can get rid of the executive committee. We can do a whole bunch of things, but if we leave it as is, and that executive committee continues to meet on topics like hiring a new CEO or finding a, I think they were kind of tasked with coming up with a process, and they brought that to you. The Open Meetings Act is going to be triggered every time. And so the question kind of is, where do you all want to go with that group as you're trying to get things done efficiently without having 8,000 meetings? Or do you want us to stay more formal, which is, I think, historically where it's been, and that is fine too. That just means Kenny and Deb and Max and Brenda, need to have a slightly different way of doing things. So Kenny, I don't know if you want to weigh in, because I've had a whole bunch of conversations with you about this and how things have worked over the summer. It's really just to bring this to the group and see where you want to go.
Thank you, Emily. So first of all, how we've met with us is in accordance with our bylaws. It says that when we have an issue with a CEO or doing some transition, that the executive team or committee would meet and follow that. So we followed exactly what our bylaws said, and every step of the way the attorneys were involved too, and so then, like Emily said, just kind of giving some historical background, this issue came up, and I said that as we were meeting, we weren't doing any type of action items. Nothing came out of this committee as an action item. Anything that we did in any of these meetings, we took back to the board and told the board what we were doing, and had the board give us guidance and direction, which I felt like the board had given us guidance and direction all along. I want you to focus on this and bring this to us, and we would bring that to them. It's that's kind of how we thought we would do it. So when this was brought to me, I said, well, we are, I guess, acting as a committee, but the more I thought about it, the more I felt like we were more acting as just a team, not really making anything actionable, but kind of putting together the wishes of the board. So at the next board meeting, we can present the board with ideas, thoughts, options on how we wanted to proceed. So I stopped calling us the executive committee and started just calling us an executive team, or just somebody that was appointed by the president, by myself, to assist with this process. So in my mind, if it's legal, and I've had these conversations with Emily and Sherry and a little bit with Rob too, is that I would just kind of, for this particular spot, I would disband the executive committee, and I would say that when we were in a situation like this, when we're working for a new CEO, or actually not a new CEO, because we weren't doing a CEO search, but a new issue where a CEO resigns or something like that, that instead of calling it the executive committee, the president, whoever is the president at the time, will assign 2 other members, so it's 3 members, to work with them to fulfill the wishes of the board and be able to bring it to the board in a quick, expedient manner, like we were able to do during the summer. So I would say that the executive team or the executive committee would be disbanded in this process, but the executive committee will still exist in a form to be able to meet with the execs from med staff, because we had this year med staff, the executive med staff, the chief of staff, the their team, along with our executive team too, which of course then is in open meetings and advertised. So that's the way, Emily, I would like to proceed if the board agrees with that. I don't know if I explained that properly enough, but maybe you could help me out with that explanation a little bit better.
Lisa,
I see some hands. Yeah.
Yes, I want to ask something too.
So I guess to maybe follow up on what Kenny said, I think that there's a semantical issue that kind of got, that maybe early on in this issue that came up that required Deb and Kenny and I to meet, that was maybe unfortunate, and that was the use of the word executive. Because my sense of what the intent was at the time was to have 3 members of the board who happened to be the president, the treasurer, and secretary to meet on with respect to this issue. And so I didn't see that as a meeting of the executive committee in any way, shape, or form. I saw that as a meeting of 3 members of the board that had been kind of asked by the board to pursue this issue. So I guess that's my number one. It seems like we're crossing 2 issues, which is the Open Meetings Act requirement of the executive committee with this group of 3 people that were brought together to, pursue this one issue. So I think, Penny, kind of explained that, but just to really drive that point home is that we weren't meeting as an executive committee. We used the term executive, maybe unfortunately, but it was really an ad hoc group of board members and we're allowed 3 members of the board may meet without triggering the Open Meetings Act. So I think that from where I view that said, I think that's, kind of the structure. On Kenny's second point, which is, the continuance of the executive committee to meet as needed, I support that completely. I think that, it's in our bylaws. It's very clear. It's in our bylaws. The executive committee includes the immediate past president as well. And so, it's a specific 4-group number of members and so forth. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Well, may I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Brenda.
Okay, what I'd like to know, and I would like through the chair, I guess, to direct this to the attorney, is we Bartlett has, of course, our own bylaws and that we operate under. But I remember when I was chair or president, the issue of, and I think it's Title 29, the Open Meetings Act, is that where it is? I don't have it right in front of me, but there was confusion. The wording of when you are required to have a noticed meeting. It's being said in this context here in this meeting that you can't have more than 3, but there was an interpretation by the attorney we were working with a few years ago that it kicked in with 3. that really you couldn't have more than 2 board members meeting. If you got to 3, that kicked it in. And there's an odd wording in there that makes it, you kind of have to read it and reread it to make it work. So what is the current interpretation of that law, aside from our bylaws that we have to comply, obviously, with the State Open Meetings Act?
Sure, through the chair. So there's 2 pieces. So it applies to, you know, boards, committees, subcommittees. And in this instance, your executive committee is really only 4 people. So it's in that instance, there's 2 sets of words. First, it's a majority, which is why you actually trigger it at 2 in your executive committee. There is some argument as to whether the ad hoc position counts or not, but I think, you know, 2. But in general, so the advice that our office has given under Mr. Palmer is that 3 people can meet, and that. But when we hit more than 3, then you've triggered the Open Meetings Act. And so I can go back and double check. I don't know if it was Ms. Costello who gave the previous, but in all of our recent guidance to committees, it's been, you can have 3 there. And I do also want to just make very, very clear that I don't think anyone did anything wrong, and everybody operated under the guidance of legal. So if there was a mistake, it was our mistake in not providing better guidance. So I do want to make that very clear.
Thank you.
Lisa?
Deb has her hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Getting back to the question of the existence of the executive committee, while I agree with that there are times when, such as the joint meeting with the Med Exec, that a group of, I'm going to call it a group of board officers rather than the executive committee, would need to meet with the Med Exec or others. My only concern with continuing to have the executive committee in the bylaws is that we're going to have this conversation over and over again, that every time more than one person meets that happens to be an officer of the board, it's going to potentially trigger our motives in what we're discussing. In our view, as Max said and Kenny said, we were acting as an ad hoc committee to resolve an issue that was time sensitive, that or to at least guide the issue at this point with the assistance of CBJ law. I'm not sure that the continued existence of the executive committee in the bylaws is necessary or even helpful. So that's just my opinion, but I think it would forestall further conversation and headaches, whatever, with regard to whether or not 2 of us meeting should have given notice that we were going to go have coffee at Heritage and talk about anything that comes up.
Lisa, I've got a question for Deb, if I could, and follow up on that.
Sure.
So Lisa, or I'm sorry, Deb, are you comfortable just leaving? Obviously, this is a bylaw amendment. If we did strike the executive committee, shall we just leave that to this, impending review of the bylaws to iron that out?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Max, to the chair, I actually would not want to wait. I want to get this cleaned up. I think we just need to clean this up sooner than later. That's my personal opinion, especially if right now we're non-compliant. We need to get this expedited. I think that's legal suggestion too. Is that correct, Emily?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm gonna to the group and the group wisdom. Our suggestion is to clean it up. Now you can do that by repealing that executive committee. If you want to come up with something else where you say executive committee is these four, and we will use very, very, very clear, specific language. You know, when we're appointing them to a task. It doesn't solve Deb's problem if, you know, Deb and Max meet for coffee, you know, that's worrisome. So I think in general, the suggestion is, unless there's a real reason for that executive committee to exist, the safer route is to repeal it, to allow you all to you know, not get into that situation. But again, that's why I brought it, because I think, you know, Ms. Knapp has a huge history. A whole bunch of you have history of why this committee existed. And so we didn't want to say, just get rid of it, if that was going to be, you know, a cascade of problems as well.
Lisa, if I may, just to respond to that, the one provision of the executive committee that it's a little bit of a concern to me to just flat get rid of is the middle part of that says shall be empowered to transact regular business of the hospital during the interim between meetings of the board, provided that any action it may take shall not conflict with existing board policy. And that is an emergency provision, is it not, Emily? I mean, that would,
yeah.
you frequently have, and I know that I've served on boards, probably we all have. That's probably a good reason why the executive committee language is there, is to, you know, because often, you know, you can have a situation where something has to happen. You can't get a quorum of the board together to make that happen. And the executive committee carve out allows you to do that. And so when I look at cleaning this up, that is a problem. I frankly, and I think maybe where us to focus on is that if the executive committee is 4 people and there has to be a majority present, and a majority present triggers an open meeting act, 2 doesn't, right? Necessarily 2 doesn't trigger that. So the Deb and Max having coffee thing wouldn't be necessarily an issue, would it, Emily?
Yeah, so the question there, and I don't have a complete answer for you, I think it's debatable, is that that 4th member is an ex officio voting member, so not technically so it's technically a group of 3. You know, as you guys are talking, and I hate to add more work to people, but another simple solution could be to add another member and to make that ex officio a full member. We work in majorities, right? We work in 3. We want to, you know, 3 is your magic number, and then a majority if it's smaller, if it's a smaller group. If you make that ex officio voting member a full member and add 1 more, then you certainly a group of 2 or 3. Let's see, if you've got 5, so a group of 2 would be fine in that scenario if you've got 5. So
well,
that is another way to do it.
The practical issue that we're about to face here, though, is that we're about to lose Brenda Knapp from the board. So we will, assuming Kenny continues to serve as president, we won't have a past president to serve on that sucker either. So, you know,
right.
Maybe the way for us to, I'm just thinking out loud here a little bit, Kenny, is if you think it's wise, you know, or would like to see us delete that you know, section, you know, 154(1) of the bylaws for the time being, you know, I won't stand in the way of that. We haven't had, and maybe Brenda could talk to whether we've had an emergency issue that's come up that we've needed to trigger that for, but you know, maybe the way for us to proceed here is to delete that committee as you're suggesting, and then chew on it more when we get into the bylaw review.
Yes, go ahead, Brenda.
Okay. In the years that I've been on the board, when I first got on the board, Nancy Davis was actually board president. And there was a meeting every month. It was a standing monthly meeting of the executive committee prior to the regular board meeting. And at that meeting, the officers discussed the agenda and any critical items that needed to be brought before the board for action. Of course, the CEO sat in on that meeting, so it was kind of an executive planning session for the meeting. And I think, it's just one more meeting, but it did move things along, although I will say that Nancy Davis was also known for having the longest meetings in history. They went on forever, but they were very full. But that was the main reason. There's never been a crisis that the executive committee has met regarding in my now almost full 9 years on the board. So that isn't an issue. But the other thing I would suggest, because I know that the executive members, team, officers, whatever, have met a lot in the past year. I've not been called into any of those. I would say eliminate, my suggestion is eliminate having the past president as part of that, have it the current elected officers only, and maybe word it that the executive committee is empowered to meet in a crisis or emergent situation to take action on behalf of the board and limit it to that. And so
that is Brenda, if we did that, then for sure Kenny and Deb couldn't have coffee.
Well, no, why? That's two of them.
Two of three. It's a majority.
You wouldn't, if the executive committee is only empowered to meet for crisis purposes, what would prohibit two officers from meeting separately?
I see your point. I see your point.
Would that work, Emily?
That would work if you had language that the role of the executive committee is only to meet in a crisis situation. Like this is their task, this is what they exist for. The fact that two of you meet, then you're just board members meeting.
Just planning something, yeah.
Or even all three, right?
Yeah, that's right. All three of you could meet because you can have the three. So if you put in language limiting executive committees role to a crisis situation, then that would work.
And one more thing, I'm sorry, Brenda or Deb, I'll let you have this. Would that also, did we also put some sort of language to be able to meet as an executive committee when meeting with med staff too? Because we do that, we want to do that at least 2 or 3 times a year. Could
yeah, if you limit, if you have a very clearly defined scope of what you want, and it's like, these are the things that executive committee is tasked with, then if you're meeting about the other things, you're just board members meeting.
Okay. Lisa, Deb's hand is up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead, Deb.
I have a question for Emily. If we're talking about limiting it, the meetings with med staff or another group that occur regularly is easy to resolve, but in the case of urgent or emergent issues, how do we, I do not remember the notice. Is it 48 hours? No, I can't remember what the notice requirement is for, pardon?
24.
24.
Oh, okay. We could probably do that. I just wanted to make sure that if we're talking about urgent or emergent issues,
yep,
that we would need to make sure that we were providing notice. And would we still be able to, in the event that it's say personnel related or something that or a legal issue that we tend to, like lawsuits that we tend to put in executive session, that we would be able to call the meeting, roll into executive session. If there's an action to be taken, we'd to forward it to the board or whatever, just the same operating procedure as we use with the full board meeting.
Yes, so you do the same procedure, you can still go into executive session. The other thing I would say, and it sounds like there really hasn't ever been a crisis that rose to this situation, but for example, the assembly, when COVID hit, let's say something like that happened, you know, the cure for an Open Meetings Act violation is to get a meeting and then, you know, and have a meeting immediately. So if there was something like, I don't even know. I don't even want to think about like, you know, but if there was like a true emergency that you couldn't give 24 hours notice, we would give notice, we would cure the meeting, we could do it and we could handle that. So I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Okay. Thank you.
So Lisa, if I could make a motion,
Yes.
I'd move that we ask Department of Law to provide corrective language or not corrective, but change the language to the executive committee section of our bylaws for review and action. And just because we meet infrequently, for review and action at the next full board meeting.
I second that. I think that's wonderful. Thank you, Max.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Hey,
Is there go ahead.
yeah, I do have another on the lines of our bylaws and the Open Meetings Act rules and stuff. And I know we're about out of time here. But I would like to bring up this issue that came up at the last board meeting that is brewing out there that I think is important. And that's what the rule and requirements are with respect to the board as it relates to somebody that might ask for something in executive session to come out. And I'd like Emily to speak to that briefly. There's some guidance on the State of Alaska Open website, and they have authoritative memos that was produced by Perkins and Coie that they cite. And in that memo and in that guidance, it's very clear that, it says that anybody that's subject to a matter to be discussed in an executive session has the right to bring that out of executive session. There's no provision that I could find in the guidance offered by the state that says that has to be approved by the board. And I'd like Emily to address that.
Sure. Yep. So through the chair. So the Open Meetings Act, the baseline is that everything is done in public. So that's why you guys, when you go into executive session, you have to make that motion. There has to be a vote. The assumption is we're having these conversations in public. For those situations where it's reputation and character, which is a really common reason to go into executive session, any person that is potentially going to be discussed in that scenario can require the meeting to move into the public. And then there's no, there's no overruling that. That just happens. And then you're fully in public. So in that scenario, let's say you're doing an evaluation. A really good scenario that's separate is the city attorney has an evaluation in front of the assembly. The assumption is it's going to be public. The assembly usually moves that it's in private, so they'll make that vote. If the vote fails, it's public. If the vote passes, it's private. But Mr. Palmer could immediately move it back into the public conversation and say, I want this in public, and that cannot be overruled then. It's just public. Does that help?
It does help a lot. There was confusion about that. Deb was kind of presented with, maybe some contradictory advice just before the last meeting. And that's why I'm bringing this up, because I think what you're sharing with us is based on what I've read and the very clear guidance on the state website. What you're saying is consistent with what the state says is the rule. And so I appreciate that.
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is much more complicated than the example you just gave us with, say, the city's attorney, because there's multiple people whose reputations could be affected. And I felt like we really got ambushed in the board meeting without proper deliberation of this whole issue. If there's 5 people who are named in some document, and the document could prejudice the reputation and character of 3 of them, and one of those people wants this to go into public, what about those 3 people whose reputations could be affected? I don't think we've really got to the true issues involved in this particular case yet. And I'm just going to put my cards on the table. I'm going to be completely opposed to moving this into public at our next meeting, because the people whose reputations could be affected have not come forward and said they want this taken to the public. Could you comment on that, please?
I can. So yes, it gets exponentially more complicated when there are multiple people that the board is potentially talking about. And I have to tell you, I've definitely been grappling with how to provide guidance on this and how to help you move forward. So in that scenario, let's say there's 5 people. 4 of them don't want it public. 1 of them does. That means it goes public. And that's how the rule is written. But absolutely, then how do you protect the other 4 people that are triggered or talked about? Do we do it in a way where we don't use names? We do it in a way that's more protective. If there's a report, i.e. a legal memo, that legal memo then becomes public. Do we do it in a way that we redact? It becomes exponentially more complicated when you have all of those players, and I fully understand that. I can assure you that there are requirements in a situation like this where the Department of Law, in this instance, sometimes it's going to be HR. They give notice to every person who is involved in that scenario, we're tracking if anyone has asked to move it into the public, and we're notifying the other people to say, 4 of you told us no, but 1 of you told us yes, so we're in public, and we want to let you know that. We've got 2 weeks until your next meeting, and I certainly am working on the issue that came up last time.
Madam Chair, if I could follow up.
Yes, please.
There's more complexity to this too, because somebody needs to adjudicate whether of those 5 people, the person who wants this to go forward is really a principal in this whole matter. I mean, just because somebody's got a name in
That's
the
right.
investigation, that's not that doesn't necessarily seem to me to qualify this, that it has to all go to public. So I'm not sure we're getting good advice on this because of the complexity of this.
I agree that there are principal characters and secondary characters. And if they're in a situation of an investigation, if somebody talks to 200 hospital employees, we don't send notice to all 200 hospital employees saying you can move this public. I agree that there should be a distinction between principal and secondary in this, that attempt has been made to distinguish between principal and secondary in this situation.
Well, who gets to adjudicate that? I mean, just because some staff person chose to make somebody a principal, that doesn't mean that person is appropriately a principal in this investigation, does it?
It's a valid question, and the answer is law has decided the principals and the secondaries. If and I am certainly willing to look back into that, look into how that would be done, and provide a little bit more guidance on how those distinctions are made.
Or shouldn't the board be able to adjudicate that issue?
It's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to that. I'm happy to look into whether it would be better for the board to decide a primary, secondary. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Chair? Or
Yes,
through the
Roger.
chair. Okay, a follow up on this. So, well, two things. It seems like when in court filings, people not named are simply identified as defendant X or whatever, or Y or Z, and there's ways of doing that. But has the full administrative appeal or grievance process been followed here? Because normally something would not come to the board until there's been a decision at the level of the CEO. Now, I know that the last CEO was involved in the issue we're talking about, apparently, or is in there somewhere. So, but we have a current CEO. Has this been fully decided at a CEO level? Then it would be appealed beyond that. And I mean, we're the appellate court of last resort. Beyond us, it goes into actually a suit, a legal suit, I guess.
Brenda, Madam Chair, if I can respond.
Yes, go ahead.
So I know that Ian, our CEO, has studied and read all the documents, and that he's met with legal too, and he it has weighed in his thoughts, and he's still kind of working through the process on exactly what's best for our organization to proceed on this, with the help of legal. I think I said that correctly. Emily, would you agree with that?
I agree with that.
And Ian, do you have any more you want to say about that?
Well, I think the way I'm looking at it is we're trying to actively resolve this, hopefully before it gets to the board. But, that doesn't necessarily prevent anyone from asking this topic. I don't think it prevents anyone from asking for this topic to be rediscussed at the board level or in public. And, my view is, well, we need to kind of assess what went wrong and how to prevent this in the future. Having things go public do not necessarily help the interests and the reputation of anyone involved, as well as our medical community, as well as our hospital. So I'm trying to actively provide some direction to some of the parties involved. Enough said, I think.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. All right. So are there any further comments? Okay. Well, I think we can adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
All right.
you. All right.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Absolutely.
It's tomorrow.
Thanksgiving.